How you doing? I'm Ken Bykoff, and welcome to O'Neill Speaks, the official podcast of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. It's difficult to take a glance at the news and not be inundated with stories about climate change, environmental disasters, and the legal controversies that surround anything having to do with the environment. The push and pull of policymakers and lobbyists and courts grab the headlines and are a seemingly constant source of discussion, but often overlooked is the role of the people responsible for implementing any policy that might be presented. Environmental managers are the boots on the ground in local communities. An environmental manager plays a crucial role in an organization's efforts to reduce its negative impact on the environment, maintain regulatory compliance, and avoid unnecessary environmental liabilities. They're responsible for implementing policies and advocating for change at the intersection of humans and the environment, and their work is essential in tackling environmental problems and communicating with people across the globe to find solutions. But those skills don't develop in a vacuum. They have to be learned. And in our ever-changing, often contentious world, education about how to become a competent environmental manager has never been more important. We're joined today by Clinical Associate Professor Emeritus Marc, who spent 3 decades as a faculty member at the O'Neill School, including teaching courses in environmental management. He's also the co-author, along with Richard Marcantonio, of Environmental Management, Concepts and Practical Skills. The book is a contemporary textbook and manual for aspiring or new environmental managers that provides the theory and practical examples needed to understand current environmental issues and trends. It focuses on environmental management through the lens of protecting public health and protecting the environment. Marc, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
So kind of explain what the importance of being a competent environmental manager is.
Well, an environmental manager, they're at local, state, federal, and even international levels. But they basically, there's 3 competencies that environmental managers, successful environmental managers should have. They should be able to understand complex and volatile issues and trends, things like environmental justice, ecosystem management, sustainability, accountability, and those are actually pretty complex issues and trends. And so they need to understand those, number one. And then with that understanding, they need to co-produce ethical environmental solutions. And that means that they have to not just, as a lot of bureaucrats are often accused of coming up with what they believe is the solution because they're the expert. They need to, in fact, deal with people who are affected. So they have to co-produce solutions, what we call public participation. So they need to co-produce those solutions. Once those solutions, in fact, are co-produced, then they have to implement them. It's not just a matter of having some kind of strategic plan that ends up sitting on a shelf or being a doorstop. They need to actually be able to implement those ethical environmental solutions. So those are the 3 competencies that a good environmental manager has, and that's how we basically start the book out and use throughout the book.
Kind of walk me through how the field of environmental management kind of developed. Where did this come from? Where did it kind of originate?
Well, it is in the field of management, and of course that's why it's here at the O'Neill School. So basically, where it developed was, of course, Rachel Carson came along in the '60s, and there were lots of new environmental laws that came along in the '70s. And they needed to have people to actually implement those laws. And the interesting thing is both for the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and for our school, it's that bringing together both science and policy. And when you can put those 2 things together, then we have the implementation is environmental management.
You talk about this environmental awakening that happened in the 60s and in the 70s. With the field of environmental management, was there just kind of the realization along the way that we need to have these policies to protect the environment, but we also need this separate idea of people to actually bring these policies to life?
That's correct. So we have our scientists, we have our policy folks, and these policies are made with the best of intentions, with the understanding that policy players are on both sides, and they get things their way, and that's what lobbyists are for and things like that. But once it becomes law or a regulation, then somebody actually has to implement it. And that's the difference between policy and management, is the actual implementation. And so environmental managers have to ask these three questions. What action has to be taken? So what are we going to do to have cleaner water, cleaner air? Who's going to take that action? And what kind of experts do you need? Who in the community is the most helpful person to go to, or people to go to? And then, do they have the resources to, in fact, implement? A lot of times, policies are made, as we all know, with unfunded or underfunded mandates. To where lawmakers come up with policies, but they don't provide the resources. And if the resources aren't there, then in fact the managers can't implement them.
You've been teaching the subject for a while now. How have you seen it changed, the field change in terms of how you teach it and how it just is perceived?
Well, it's a pretty young field. It's EPA is just over 50 years old, as is our school. And so there's a certain coevolution that has gone on. And the simple term of evolution means that things have changed. We have, where we used to put scientists, our policy experts, into these agencies to try to improve our environment and to protect human health in the environment. We realize that we actually need these scientists and policy wonks need a little bit more management expertise. And so basically I would say the change has been a movement towards better management.
Well, the book is Environmental Management, Concepts and Practical Skills. What kind of motivated you to write the book?
Well, I am a scientist by training, but I was a manager, an environmental manager of a state environmental agency. And then I've been working with EPA for many years as a clinical professor. And so I have lots of practice. But what I wanted to do is to be able to offer something to both aspiring environmental managers, newly minted environmental managers, and their instructors, to where they have a really good framework that they can start out on. So the book and my method of teaching, in fact, is scaffolding. I kind of like to build a foundation and build on that. And so, for instance, we start out with some basic things in management about the environmental manager has to know what action is going to be taken. What kind of program are we going to have? Are we going to have a good permitting program for air quality? And then once we know what that program is, what does it take? How many people do we need? What kind of people do we need? How much money do we need? And those are the resources. And then how do we get those resources? And typically we call that political management. So this book starts out with the idea that there's program management. What are you going to do? And then resource management. What do you need to get it done? And then where are you going to get those resources? Political management.
How a course is taught or how a subject matter is taught is as, if not more important than the subject matter itself, because you need to have students engage and actually learn the lessons you're trying to get across. What's the key to teaching this field and providing the practical skills to students?
Well, you of course you need to have the content. So this book, each chapter has a skill that we're trying to scaffold on top of the previous one. And so you need to have that, but those need to be relatable to the students or to the new professional. And so what we do in the book, throughout the book, is we provide windows from people who are out in the field, real-world examples of how to do that. And I personally, because I am a clinical professor and have been in practice for 40 years or so, I wanted to, it's pretty easy for me to relate that stuff to students. And most students like war stories and that kind of stuff. So that's how I do it. And that is used throughout the book. And in fact, at the end of each chapter, there's questions, material to where the students can evaluate themselves on if they have learned that stuff.
You mentioned the real world examples, and I know that really brings a subject matter to life, that they could students could put themselves in those spaces. It also seems to me that a lot of the environmental issues that we have, and especially environmental disasters that we see, they're not new. Things have happened for decades that are very similar, whether it be, an oil spill from 30 years ago. It faces a lot of the same challenges as now. I don't want to use the word helpful because that isn't the right word, but how useful is the ability to use real world examples that may have been resolved. People have seen the mistakes and the positives of a reaction to it, when it's still the kind of thing that happens. I don't want to say regularly, but it's not uncommon for something like an oil spill to happen. How helpful is it to be able to take something from 30 years ago, before students may have been born, and present it in a way that they could see themselves maybe having to face in the future?
Well, you're right. These things have been going on a long time, and very little of it is new. It's been happening over and over and over. And by that very fact, that's why we have environmental laws, because it happened so much and the impact was so great. So whether it had to do with oil spills, or whether it had to do with train derailments, or whether it had to do with forest fires, air quality, water quality, that kind of stuff. So we have these laws, which came about years ago because these things kept happening. What I do with the students, well, they have the examples in the book of real-world examples of how things happen, but also one of the skills that we really start out early on in the book is we do a situational analysis, to where the student basically learns how to look at something they see in the paper. They wake up and see in the paper that morning, and they know that they're going to have to go to their boss and discuss it with him or her, and they need to be able to analyze that situation. What laws apply? What are the issues? Is it an issue of environmental justice with regard to discriminating against people who are disenfranchised? Is it an issue of unfunded or underfunded mandates? So they need to be able to know the law, they need to know the issues, the legal trends, and then they need to get into the science a little bit, and what are their recommendations based on previous incidents. And so that's situational analysis is a huge skill that runs throughout my course and the book.
Because it is an ever-changing landscape in terms of dealing with environmental issues. They shift over time, but it seems like these basic skills remain over time as well. Even as, again, I mentioned earlier about older examples of disasters still happening, environmental issues, and as policies shift and change and focuses and resources change, these basic skills in dealing with these situations don't really change all that much. Is that right?
That's right. It's situational analysis is basically painting a picture of what is out there, what is going on. And any artist knows that they are going to change their location. If they're doing landscape painting, for instance, they're going to change their location all the time, but their palettes are going to have the same kind of paints so they can still paint that landscape. And those paints are, going to stay the same. The sky is still blue, forest is still green, and so those skills stay the same.
I know that this is a textbook, but it's also designed to be a practical manual for people that are already in the field. Talk a little bit about that aspect of the book and being able to support people that may have already moved into careers in environmental management.
Well, I would like to say that my students have this background when they leave my course, at least the beginnings of it. But schools throughout the country who are producing fine environmental scientists and fine environmental policy analysts, when it comes to management, they are not trained in that. And so that's what we're trying to do is to provide something, a manual for these folks that are newly minted. They're in their jobs at the local, state, and federal levels, trying to protect human health and the environment in terms of our air quality, water quality, et cetera. And this gives them a manual on how to not just do their jobs, but why they're doing their jobs.
Your many years as an educator, what are you most proud of when it comes to your impact that you may have made or your influence you may have had on your students in this field? And what are you most proud of with the book?
Well, I'd say with my impact at my age and stage, when I get old students get a hold of me and say, hey, this is the stuff you taught really made a difference. And when I walk in the halls of EPA and I have old students come up and chat with me about contemporary issues and how they're still using some of those same skills. So that makes me pretty proud. And it also, again, was one of the reasons why I wrote the book, is I basically am trying to put what evolved into my course over 25 years. Everyone can have it now. And so with the book, I would say that it's a true rending of how one talks to students, scholars, and colleagues. And so it's pretty easy stuff. All books kind of put you to sleep, but this one hopefully doesn't do it as fast.
Well, and it's got to make it easier to also try to explain to policymakers and lawmakers, people who aren't experts in the field, communication skills and teaching them why it's important and why the environmental manager's viewpoint is important has to be critical as well.
It's absolutely critical. In fact, we have a whole chapter just on communication and public participation, and that's something that's people need help with. These are skills. Skills are there's a lot of talented athletes out there, but they still have to be taught how to throw a pitch correctly and how to hit a ball correctly. And you just don't learn it by doing it once. They have to do it over and over and over again. And that repetition is basically the heart of perfecting skills.
Where can people find the book?
Well, they can find the book on Amazon. They can also go to Cambridge University Press and in my class.
Well, Marc, thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate your passion for this field, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it.
Well, that's all the time we have today on O'Neill Speaks. O'Neill Speaks is the official podcast of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. All opinions and comments on O'Neill Speaks belong to the host and the guests of the O'Neill School and don't necessarily reflect those of the school itself. Music for O'Neill Speaks is by Manos Mars. Be sure to subscribe to O'Neill Speaks on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcatcher app so you don't miss an episode. We're out of time, but for now and for the O'Neill School, I'm Ken Bykoff saying thanks for listening, everybody.